The massive space station called Harmony Prime floated in the dark void between stars like a giant metal flower made of spinning wheels and glowing towers. Every year the smartest beings from 12 different worlds came here to compete and show off what their species could do. The station was huge enough to hold millions of creatures and had different sections for different types of aliens who needed different air to breathe and different gravity to walk in. Today was special because it was the day of the great academic exchange where young minds from across the galaxy would face tests that would prove which species was the most advanced. The viewing halls were packed with important aliens wearing fancy clothes and carrying expensive gadgets that beeped and flashed with important data. In the main docking bay, aliens of all shapes and sizes were arriving on ships that looked like floating crystals or balls of pure energy or giant metal insects. The Valkyrie came first, stepping out of their crystal ship like living diamonds that sang when they moved. Their bodies were made of some kind of clear stone that changed colors when they thought, and they moved with perfect grace like dancers made of light. Next came the Theron collective, arriving in a ship that looked like a giant brain with engines. Their representatives were strange creatures that looked like they were made of metal and flesh at the same time, but the scary part was that they all moved exactly the same way at exactly the same time, like they were all controlled by one giant mind somewhere far away. When one of them turned their head, all of them turned their heads. When one of them blinked, they all blinked. The Zephyrians were the strangest of all because they were not solid at all, but were made of pure energy that glowed and shifted like the northern lights. They floated instead of walking, and when they talked it sounded like music mixed with the sound of electricity. They had to stay inside special force fields to keep their energy bodies from spreading out and disappearing into space. Other species kept arriving throughout the day. The Morphians had 6 arms and skin that changed color based on their mood. The Quillians looked like giant birds with 4 wings and beaks that could speak in perfect harmony. The Drachnari were like walking trees made of metal, and their eyes glowed like small suns. Each species brought their best and brightest young minds equipped with the most advanced technology their worlds could provide. The alien observers whispered to each other in languages that sounded like singing or clicking or the sound of wind through metal. They were all excited to see their chosen representatives prove that their species was the most evolved and advanced in the galaxy. Most of them had studied the files on all the other participants and were confident that their own people would win easily. Then something unexpected happened. A small, simple ship that looked like it was made of basic metal and plastic docked at the station. It was so plain and ordinary that some of the aliens thought it might be a maintenance vessel or a supply ship. But when the airlock opened, a young human stepped out carrying nothing but a worn backpack and wearing clothes that looked like they came from a primitive world. His name was Park Jiwon, and he was 20 years old with black hair and dark eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He was not very tall compared to some of the aliens, and not very muscular compared to others, but there was something about the way he moved that made a few of the older observers pay attention. He walked like he was comfortable everywhere he went, and he smiled like he knew something funny that nobody else understood. The first alien to approach him was Veltaran, a tall Valkyrie whose crystal body was pulsing with curious blue light through the universal translator that all species used to communicate. Veltaran spoke with a voice like wind chimes. "Why do you carry no enhancement equipment, human? Where are your neural amplifiers and calculation matrices? Where are your strength boosters and reflex enhancers?" Jiwan looked at the beautiful crystal being and shrugged his shoulders in a way that seemed very casual. "I just brought myself," he said with that same easy smile that is usually enough back home. The other alien delegates heard this, and many of them made sounds that their species used for laughing. The Theron collective made a harmonious humming sound. The Zephyrians flickered with colors that meant amusement. The Morphians changed to a light green color that showed they thought something was funny. They had all studied the files about Earth and humans, and what they had learned made them confident that this would be easy. Earth was listed as a primitive world with short-lived creatures who fought wars with each other and had barely developed space travel. Their technology was crude, their bodies were weak, and their minds were slow compared to the great civilizations of the galaxy. But One being on the station was not Laughing Station. Commander Kretak was a very old Morphian who had lived for over 300 years and had seen many different species come and go through Harmony Prime. He had 6 arms like all Morphians, but his skin was a deep purple color that meant he was very wise and experienced. His eyes had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, and he knew how to read the signs when something was not what it seemed. As Kretak watched the young human walking through the station, he noticed things that the other aliens missed. Jiwon moved through the artificial gravity like it was natural to him. Even though Earth gravity was supposed to be much stronger, his eyes were constantly scanning everything around him, not like a tourist seeing new sights, but like a hunter checking for dangers and opportunities. His breathing was steady and calm, even though he was surrounded by creatures that could kill him easily. The way Jiwon carried himself reminded Kretak of something he had learned long ago about the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. They were not the ones who looked scary or acted aggressive. The most dangerous ones were the ones who looked harmless until the moment they struck. The first test was announced over the station intercom system. All participants would face a challenge in the maximum gravity chamber, where the artificial gravity could be increased to levels that would crush most beings. The chamber was designed to test physical strength and endurance, and most species needed special equipment to survive in conditions that were 3 times stronger than their homeworlds. The alien participants began preparing their equipment. The Valkyrie brought mechanical suits that would support their crystal bodies. The Theron Collective activated their strength-sharing system that let them combine their power. The Zephyrians compressed their energy forms into denser configurations that could handle the pressure. Jiwon listened to the explanation of the test and asked one simple question. Is this supposed to be difficult? When the gravity chamber activated, the crushing force hit everyone at once. Most of the alien participants fell to their knees immediately. Some collapsed completely, unable to move under the weight that was pressing down on them like invisible hands, trying to squash them flat. Others managed to crawl a few steps before giving up and signaling for help, but Jiwon did something that made everyone watching fall silent. He stood up, took a deep breath, and started walking around the chamber like he was taking a casual stroll through a park. He moved with the same easy confidence he had shown when he first arrived, occasionally stopping to help other participants who had fallen to their feet. He lifted them with one hand like they weighed nothing at all. The alien observers stared in shock. According to all their calculations, the human should have been crushed flat. His bones were not denser than normal, his muscles were not bigger than expected, and he showed no signs of any technology that could help him survive. Yet he was walking around like the crushing gravity was no problem at all. When the test ended and the gravity returned to normal, the other participants were exhausted and some needed medical attention, but Jiwon looked exactly the same as when he had started. He rolled his shoulders like he was stretching after a nap and asked if they had anything more challenging. The station computer announced the results. Jiwon had achieved a perfect score, moving freely through the chamber for the entire test period. While helping other participants, he had done something that should have been impossible for his species. When reporters asked him how he had managed this incredible feat, Jiwon seemed genuinely confused by the question. This is about the same as doing push-ups back home, he said matter-of-factly. Earth gravity is pretty strong, you know. The delegates began to look at each other with new expressions on their faces. They were starting to realize that maybe they had made a mistake about humans. Maybe the files about Earth had not told them the whole story, but this was just the beginning and they had no idea what other surprises were waiting for them. The next morning brought the academic portion of the exchange, and all the alien delegates were confident that this would be where their superiority would finally show. The physical test had been surprising, but everyone knew that intelligence was what really mattered in an advanced civilization, and surely no primitive species could compete with minds that had been enhanced by millions of years of technological development. The testing hall was a massive dome filled with floating screens and holographic displays that could show complex mathematical equations in 17 different dimensions. The air hummed with the sound of advanced computers and translation devices working to convert thoughts and ideas between species that had evolved on completely different worlds. Zephyra, the four-armed Quillian, who served as the chief academic moderator, strutted to the center of the hall with all the confidence of someone who had overseen hundreds of these competitions. Her feathers were bright gold today, which meant she was feeling very pleased with herself, and her beak clicked rhythmically as she prepared to announce the first challenge. The mathematics test would begin with problems that required understanding of quantum dimensional theory applied through 12 different logical frameworks. These were the kind of equations that the greatest minds in the galaxy worked on for years, and solving even one of them was considered a major achievement. The Valkyrie had brought their finest crystal matrix computers that could process calculations at the speed of light. Volterrans stepped forward with crystalline body pulsing with confident blue patterns. The Valkyrie were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate mathematicians because their crystal minds could hold thousands of complex equations simultaneously and process them without any errors. Their representative began connecting to their ship-based quantum computers, preparing to access calculation power that could solve problems faster than most species could even read them. The Theron Collective had sent their best mathematical minds working together as one giant brain. Their representative was a strange fusion of organic and mechanical parts that could communicate instantly with thousands of other Theron mathematicians back on their home world. When they worked together, they could divide massive problems into tiny pieces and solve them all at the same time. The Zephyrians brought their energy-based consciousness that could perceive mathematical relationships in ways that solid beings could never understand. Their representative was a shifting aurora of colors called Zephanara, who could see patterns in numbers the way other species saw pictures. The mathematical concepts that took other species years to learn came naturally to energy beings who existed as pure information. Other species prepared their own advanced systems. The Morphians activated their secondary brains that were designed specifically for mathematical processing. The Quillians accessed their genetic memory banks that contained mathematical knowledge passed down through millions of generations. Each species was confident that their approach was the best, and that victory was certain. Then the first problem appeared on the holographic displays. It was a massive equation that filled the air with symbols and numbers arranged in patterns that seemed to twist and change as you looked at them. The problem required understanding of dimensional mathematics that most species had taken centuries to develop, combined with logical frameworks that were completely alien to biological thinking. The Valkyrie immediately began processing with their crystal forms lighting up like Christmas trees as they worked. The Theron Collective started speaking in perfect harmony as thousands of minds worked together on different parts of the problem. The Zephyrians began shifting through color patterns that represented different mathematical concepts. Everyone expected this to take RC1 looked at the floating equation for exactly 3 seconds, then picked up a basic writing pad and wrote down the answer. He moved to the second problem, stared at it for 2 seconds, and wrote that answer down too. By the time the other participants had finished setting up their advanced equipment and connecting to their homeworld computers, he had completed 20 problems and was stretching his neck like he was bored. The alien observers assumed he had given up and was just writing random numbers down because there was no way any biological mind could solve problems that fast without massive technological assistance. But when the automated checking system announced the results, every single answer was completely correct. Sephara's 4 arms began trembling as she stared at her display screens. The station computers ran diagnostic checks 3 times, assuming there had been some kind of error, but the numbers did not lie. The human had achieved a perfect score in 4 minutes and 37 seconds, solving problems that should have taken the best mathematical minds in the galaxy several hours to complete. When the stunned moderator asked Jiwan to explain his method, he seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "I just looked at the patterns and worked backwards from what the answer should be," he said with the same casual tone he used for everything. "Is that not what everyone does?" The alien mathematicians stared at him in complete confusion. He had solved problems that required understanding of concepts their species had spent centuries developing, and he made it sound like basic arithmetic that any child could do. The Valkyrie delegate's crystal form was flickering with colors that meant extreme confusion and distress. The second test was pattern recognition and logic, which was supposed to be the specialty of the Zephyrians, their energy-based minds could see relationships and connections that solid matter beings could never perceive. They presented a series of multidimensional puzzles that required understanding 12 different logical systems all working together at the same time. Zephyrinara began working with confident streams of color flowing through their energy. Formed like a living rainbow, each color represented a different aspect of the logical framework, and the way they moved and combined showed the complex thinking process that energy beings used to solve impossible problems. Jiwan looked at the first puzzle, tilted his head slightly, and said, "Oh, this is like Sudoku, but with more dimensions." He began filling in answers with the casual speed of someone doing a crossword puzzle in a newspaper. The Zephyrian's confident colors began to flicker with uncertainty as the human solved puzzle after puzzle without showing any signs of strain or difficulty. When the results were announced, Jiwan had again achieved a perfect score and had done it faster than the energy being who was supposed to be the natural master of this type of thinking. The other delegates were beginning to whisper among themselves in languages that sounded increasingly worried and confused. The third test was memory and information processing. The Quillians brought their genetic memory banks that allowed them to access information stored in their DNA across hundreds of generations. The Morphians activated their secondary brains that were designed specifically for storing and retrieving vast amounts of data. The challenge involved memorizing a complex star chart with over 10,000 individual pieces of information, including stellar positions, gravitational influences, temporal variations, and dimensional coordinates. The participants were given 30 minutes to study the information, then asked to reproduce it exactly from memory. Most species needed their technological enhancements just to process that much information, let alone remember it. The Quillian delegate began accessing their genetic databases with the smooth efficiency of a biological computer. The Morphians split their consciousness between their primary and secondary brains, doubling their processing power. Jawan looked at the star chart for exactly 12 minutes, then spent the remaining 18 minutes sitting quietly with his eyes closed. The other participants assumed he had given up, completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information he was supposed to remember, but when the reproduction phase began, he drew the entire chart from memory, including tiny details that some of the technologically enhanced participants had missed. His version was not just accurate, it was more complete than the original because he had noticed patterns and connections that the original creators had not intended to include. The testing continued for 3 more days, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every single challenge ended the same way. Regardless of what type of test it was, Jiwan would approach each problem with the same casual confidence, apply what seemed like basic common sense techniques, and achieve results that the most advanced alien civilizations could not match. Even with all their technology and millions of years of development, tests of reflexes showed that he could react faster than beings whose nervous systems were enhanced with artificial components. Tests of endurance proved that he could outlast species who had been genetically modified for stamina. Tests of creativity revealed that he could find solutions that no one else had even considered possible. But the most disturbing part for the alien observers was not just that he was winning, it was how easy he made it look. Every challenge that pushed their greatest minds to the absolute limits of their capabilities seemed to be just a mild diversion for the human. He approached galaxy-shaking problems with the same attitude most beings used. For simple games, the delegates began holding emergency meetings in private chambers throughout the station. The implications of what they were seeing went far beyond a simple academic competition. If this was what by the 4th day, news of the humans' impossible performance had spread throughout every level of Harmony Prime like a virus that no one could stop. Scientists from distant worlds were arriving on emergency transport ships. Diplomats were sending urgent messages back to their home governments. Military observers who had not been invited to the academic exchange were suddenly appearing in the station corridors, asking questions that no one wanted to answer. Dr. Min Haiwan, the head of Earth's small delegation, found herself being cornered by increasingly desperate alien officials every time she tried to walk through the station. The corridors buzzed with whispered conversations in dozens of different languages as beings tried to understand What they were witnessing, some spoke in clicks and whistles, others in harmonious tones that sounded like singing, and still others in electronic sounds that seemed to come from machines rather than living creatures. The Valkyrie ambassador, Velthara, was a towering crystal entity whose body was almost 3 meters tall and whose crystalline form contained more computing power than some entire planets. When she cornered Dr. Min in the diplomatic quarters, her crystal body was pulsing with colors. That meant extreme agitation and barely controlled fear. Dr. Min, we must know the truth, she said through the universal translator system. Has your species been hiding your real capabilities? Are you using some form of technology that our sensors cannot detect? Are you genetically enhanced in ways that do not appear? In our Scanshiwan sighed deeply because she had been having this same conversation dozens of times with different alien officials who all asked the same questions with the same desperate tone. Ambassador, I promise you that Jiwan is exactly what he appears to be. He is a 20-year-old geology student from Seoul National University. His physical and mental capabilities are completely normal for our species. The only unusual thing about him is that he volunteered for this program when most of his classmates were too nervous about meeting aliens to apply. The Theron Collective had sent their finest analytical minds to study every recording of Jiwan's performance using computer systems that could process information faster than most species could think. Their representative was a biomechanical interface that spoke for thousands of linked consciousnesses working together on this single problem. We have analyzed every aspect of the human's performance, they announced to a gathering of concerned delegates. Movement patterns, reaction times, problem-solving approaches, breathing patterns, heart rate variations, and even the electrical activity in his brain. There is no evidence of technological enhancement, genetic modification, cybernetic implants, or external assistance of any kind. Yet he consistently performs at levels that should be physically and mentally impossible according to all known biological limitations. Commander Kretak called for an emergency session of the station's governing council, which had never happened in the 300-year history of Harmony Prime. Representatives from 12 major galactic civilizations gathered in the Central Assembly Hall, where their various forms of communication created a chaotic symphony of sounds, lights, and electromagnetic signals. The agenda was simple but unprecedented. How should the galaxy respond to the discovery that humanity was apparently far more capable than anyone had realized? The implications were staggering, and no one wanted to be the first to voice what everyone was thinking. The Zephyrian military advisor was a dense concentration of energy called Zefkala, whose form crackled with nervous electricity. If this human represents normal capabilities for his species, what are their exceptional individuals like? What about their athletes, their scientists, their engineers, their soldiers, their military specialists? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud that no one wanted to breathe. Every species in the galaxy had their own elite specialists who represented the absolute peak of what their civilization could achieve. But if Jiwan was just an average human, then humanity's elite must be operating on a level that no one had ever imagined possible. Meanwhile, the subject of all this concern remained completely unaware of the diplomatic crisis he was causing. Jiwan spent his free time exploring the different sections of the station, chatting with maintenance workers from various species and learning simple games that he could play with anyone willing to teach him. He approached every new experience with the same casual curiosity that he brought to the academic test. His behavior only made the situation more disturbing for the alien observers. Here was a being who could outperform their greatest minds and strongest bodies, yet he acted like it was completely normal. He did not boast about his achievements or seem impressed by his own capabilities. He treated extraordinary accomplishments like they were everyday occurrences that anyone could manage with a little effort. The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Haiwan was approached by Velanara, a young Valkyrie scientist who had been studying human biology and evolutionary history with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that threatened everything she thought she knew about the universe. Dr. Min, I believe I understand what we are seeing, she said, with her crystal form flickering between different colors that showed excitement mixed with terror. Your species did not evolve on a garden world like most of ours, did your planet? Is what we would classify as a death world. Everything there is designed to kill you at every stage of development. Thuan nodded slowly, finally understanding why the aliens were so shocked by Guan's performance. You are right, Earth is extremely hostile compared to most inhabited worlds. Our gravity is crushing by galactic standards. Our weather systems are violent and unpredictable. Our biological environment is competitive. Beyond anything most species have ever encountered, we did not develop technology to make life more comfortable. We developed it to survive in conditions that would destroy most galactic civilizations in minutes. The revelation spread through the station's communication networks, like wildfire, transforming confusion into something approaching panic. The human was not enhanced or exceptional or using hidden technology. He was simply the product of a world that had spent millions of years creating the ultimate survivors. Every challenge they had presented to him was trivial compared to the everyday reality of life on Earth. The gravity that crushed other species was actually lighter than his homeworld. The mathematical problems that required their most advanced computers were simple compared to the calculations humans did instinctively just to survive. In their chaotic environment, the physical tests that pushed alien bodies to their breaking point were easier than the basic activities humans performed every day. Earth was not just a hostile world, it was a training ground that never stopped testing everything that lived on it. The weather could change from pleasant to deadly in minutes. The ground could shake and split open without warning. The air could become poisonous, or the temperature could swing between freezing and boiling. Predators hunted everything else, and everything else had to hunt to survive. Humans had not just survived in this environment, they had thrived. They had become generalists who could adapt to any situation, specialists who could master any skill and problem, solvers who could find solutions that no one else had considered. They had turned survival into an art form and adaptation into an instinct. But the most disturbing realization was still to come. If humans were this capable as individuals, what were they like as a group? What was their society like, their industry, their expansion potential, their military? The delegates began to understand that they were not just dealing with a new species joining the galactic community. They were dealing with potential successors to their entire way of life, beings who could outthink their computers, outfight their warriors, and outwork their most advanced automated systems. The academic exchange had become something much more significant than anyone had planned. It was first contact with a species that operated on completely different principles than anything the galaxy had encountered, and as the tests continued, the aliens began to realize that their carefully ordered universe was about to change in ways that no one could predict or control. The question was no longer who would win the academic competition. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity represented. The recreational facilities on Harmony Prime included a massive hunting preserve that was considered one of the most advanced entertainment systems in the galaxy. It was a holographic environment where beings could safely experience the thrill of hunting without any real danger. The system could create any type of terrain, from the dense jungles of the Morphean homeworld to the crystal caves of Valkyrie space to the energy storms of Zephyrian dimensions. The hunting simulation had been designed by the Theron Collective using their knowledge of predator species from across the galaxy. It was meant to be a challenging but safe way for civilized beings to experience something their ancestors might have done millions of years ago. Before they evolved past the need for such primitive activities, most species treated it as an interesting historical exercise or a way to test their technological equipment. When Jiwan mentioned that he was interested in trying the hunting simulation, the alien observers saw this as a perfect opportunity to finally understand what they were dealing with. They decided to set up the most difficult scenario in the entire system database, a multi-level pursuit through constantly changing terrain, with prey that could adapt and learn and predators that would actively hunt the hunter. The scenario was called the Endless Chase, and it had been designed to challenge entire teams of specialists working together with advanced equipment. Most species needed squads of trained hunters using the finest technology their civilizations could provide just to survive, let alone succeed. The current record was held by a Morphean military unit that had worked in perfect coordination for 6 hours to complete the challenge, the simulation would begin in a dense forest environment with gravity set to standard galactic levels, which was about one-third of Earth normal. The artificial prey consisted of a pack of synthetic creatures programmed with the intelligence and instincts of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. They could think, plan coordinate attacks, set traps, and adapt their behavior based on whatever the hunter did. The environment itself would shift and change, creating new challenges. Every few minutes, dense forests could become open plains or rocky mountains or deep caves or floating platforms. Suspended over bottomless chasms, the weather could change from calm to violent storms. The very ground could become quicksand or ice, or burning lava, depending on what the computer thought would create the most interesting challenge. Ejijun stepped into the simulation chamber, wearing the same simple clothes he had worn since arriving at the station and carrying only basic equipment that looked primitive compared to the advanced gear other species used. The alien observers gathered around monitoring screens to watch what they expected would be either a quick failure or possibly the most educational demonstration of human capabilities they had yet seen. The simulation activated, and Zhuan found himself standing in a dark forest where the trees seemed to move and whisper in languages that did not exist. The air was thick with the scent of unknown flowers and the sound of creatures moving through the shadows just beyond the edge of sight. Somewhere in this digital wilderness were the synthetic predators that would test every skill he possessed. For nearly a full minute he stood completely still, just breathing and looking around. The alien observers assumed he was overwhelmed by the complexity of the scenario, or possibly frozen with fear at finding himself alone in such a dangerous environment. But then something changed in his posture and expression, and the aliens realized they were about to see something they were not prepared for. Zhuan smiled, and everything became different. He moved through the holographic forest like he was part of it, flowing between trees without making a sound and leaving no trace of his passage. The monitoring equipment showed that his heart rate was actually decreasing as he entered what appeared to be a state of relaxed focus that was completely at odds with the dangerous situation he faced. The synthetic predators were programmed with the hunting patterns of the galaxy's most successful species. They used pack tactics learned from the Drachneri pack hunters, stealth techniques developed by the shadow cats of Morphean space, and the patient stalking methods of the crystal spiders from Valkyrie worlds. But as they began to hunt the human, they encountered something that their programming had no reference. For Zhuan was not following any known hunting pattern. He was not using standard tactics or predictable strategies. Instead, he seemed to be reading the environment in ways that the computer had not programmed to be possible. He tracked the synthetic creatures not by following their obvious signs, but by noticing tiny changes in the digital ecosystem that should not have been detectable. The first pack of artificial predators tried to ambush him using a classic three-directional approach that had been proven effective against every known species, but somehow he moved before they completed their attack, seeming to sense their presence before the simulation. Sensors had even registered their positions. The creatures found themselves hunting empty air while he observed them from a location that should have been impossible to reach so quickly. What happened next made the alien observers fall silent with shock. Instead of continuing to hunt the assigned prey, Zhuan began hunting the predators that were supposed to be hunting him. He turned the simulation into a completely different game where he was the apex predator and everything else was trying to survive his attention. The synthetic creatures that had been programmed to be the ultimate hunters found themselves being systematically eliminated by something that moved like a force of nature. He did not just defeat them, he did it in ways that should not have been possible. The computer kept creating new challenges and obstacles, but he adapted to each one instantly, as if he had been preparing for exactly these situations. His entire life, when the environment changed from forest to desert, he moved like a desert creature. When it became an underwater scenario, he moved like he was born in the ocean. The Morphean military observers could not believe what they were seeing. On their screens, their 6 arms gestured frantically as they tried to understand the tactical principles behind what they were witnessing. He is not following any known hunting doctrine, they reported to the other delegates. He is not using standard approaches. He is making the environment work for him in ways that our best strategists have never considered. But The most disturbing aspect of his performance was not his skill, it was his attitude. Throughout the entire simulation, Ji-won maintained the same casual, playful demeanor he had shown during every other test. What the galaxy's finest military minds would consider an intense life or death combat scenario, he approached like a fun game with friends. He was enjoying himself. The simulation ran for 3 hours before the computer finally admitted defeat and declared the scenario complete. Ji-won had not only achieved a perfect score, he had done it in 1/3 the time of the previous record, and he had made it look effortless. The system had run out of challenges to present because everything it created was neutralized before it could become a threat. As he walked out of the chamber, still smiling and looking completely relaxed, he mentioned casually, "That was fun, but the gravity was so light it felt like I was floating the whole time. Do you have anything set to Earth normal weight?" The implications of what they had witnessed hit the alien observers like a physical blow. This was not just about individual capability anymore. If humans approached what other species called combat with this level of casual competence, what would happen when they encountered actual threats? How would they respond to real enemies who fought with no rules and no mercy? Commander Kretak accessed the station's classified military databases, looking for any information about human conflict behavior. What he found there made his purple skin turn almost black with fear. The files described something called warfare, which most civilized species had evolved beyond millions of years ago, but humans had not only retained this primitive behavior, they had refined it into a science. The reports described a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history in constant conflict, not just with other species, but with itself. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire planets, tactics that treated massive casualties as acceptable losses, and a strategic flexibility that came from facing enemies who used every possible advantage, including ones that violated every rule of civilized behavior. The hunting simulation had revealed the truth that the academic tests had only hinted at. Humans were not just survivors or problem solvers. They were predators, and not just any predators. They were the kind that had learned to hunt everything, including each other, and had become very, very good at it. The delegates began to understand that the casual academic exchange had revealed something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Whether he knew it or not, Ji-won had been conducting reconnaissance, studying their capabilities and weaknesses. With skills that had been developed over millions of years of evolutionary warfare, they had invited a predator into their midst, and now they had to decide what to do about it. The revelation about human nature spread through Harmony Prime's diplomatic channels like a plague that infected every conversation and every decision. Emergency meetings were called in secret rooms throughout the station. Classified communications were sent to homeworlds across the galaxy at faster than light speeds. Military advisors, who had been enjoying peaceful retirements, were suddenly activated and ordered to report for duty immediately. The casual academic exchange had become the most important first contact scenario in galactic history, and no one had been prepared for anything like this. The alien delegates found themselves trying to understand not just what humans were capable of, but what they intended to do with those capabilities, and whether the rest of the galaxy would survive the encounter. Min Haewon had become the most important person on the station, even though she had never wanted that responsibility. She found herself in constant meetings with increasingly nervous alien diplomats who all wanted the same answers to questions that she was not sure how to address. Every species wanted to know if humans were a threat, if they were planning conquest, and if there was any way to defend against them. The Velkari ambassador Velthara had requested a private meeting in the station's most secure communication center where conversations could not be intercepted or recorded. Her crystalline form was flickering with patterns that indicated extreme stress and barely controlled fear. Min, we need to understand what we are dealing with, she said through the universal translator. Her voice carried harmonics that meant she was speaking for her entire civilization. Your representative has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our most advanced military specialists. Our finest analytical minds are suggesting that humans might represent the greatest threat our galaxy has ever encountered. Please help us understand your true intention. Shuan felt the weight of representing her entire species in a conversation that could determine the future of interstellar relations. Ambassador, I understand your concerns, but you are seeing patterns and threats that simply do not exist. Jiwan is not a soldier or a weapons specialist or a strategic planner. He is a geology student who enjoys hiking and playing video games. The capabilities you have observed are not the result of military training or hostile intentions. They are simply what it means to grow up on Earth. But even as she said the words, she was beginning to understand how alien that concept was to the rest of the galaxy. Most species in the galactic community had evolved on worlds that were fundamentally hospitable to life. Their planets had stable weather systems, predictable seasonal changes, and ecosystems that existed in gentle balance, where cooperation was more important than competition. Earth was nothing like that. Earth was a constant test of survival, where every day brought new challenges, and only the most adaptable creatures lived long enough to reproduce. The weather could change from pleasant to deadly in hours. The ground could shake and split without warning. Predators hunted everything, and everything had to learn to hunt or hide or fight to survive. The truth was that humans had never stopped evolving. While other species had achieved technological mastery and then remained essentially unchanged for millions of years, humans had continued to develop under constant pressure. They had become ultimate generalists who could adapt to any environment, survive any challenge, and overcome any obstacle through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. What the aliens saw as impossible capabilities were just the baseline requirements for survival on humanity's homeworld. Every human had to be able to think, quickly react instantly, adapt constantly, and never give up, because anything less meant death on a world that was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Commander Kretak requested access to Earth's historical databases, hoping to understand the context that had created beings like Jiwan. What he discovered there challenged everything he thought he knew about civilized behavior and acceptable limits of conflict. The files described a species that had fought constant wars, not just for territory or resources, but for abstract concepts like honor, freedom, religious beliefs, and political ideologies. They had developed weapons that could destroy continents and then had shown the restraint not to use them. They had created art that celebrated both beauty and violence, often simultaneously. They had built civilizations that could span continents and then had torn them down and rebuilt them again when they decided they could do better. But the most disturbing discovery was the concept of recreational competition. Humans had taken activities that were essential for survival and turned them into games they ran not to escape predators, but because they enjoyed the challenge. They fought not to defend territory, but to test themselves against worthy opponents. They competed not because they had to, but because they wanted to prove they could. The hunting simulation that had revealed Jiwan's predatory capabilities was not a test of military skills to him. It was entertainment. The kind of scenario that would represent a life or death struggle for most species was something humans did for fun. When they were bored and wanted to challenge themselves, the delegates began to realize that they had been approaching the situation from completely the wrong perspective. They had assumed that humans were like them, using advanced technology and careful planning to overcome challenges. But humans were something entirely different. They were a species that had turned adaptation into an instinct, problem-solving into a reflex, and survival into an art form that they practiced constantly. The Theran collective, with their shared consciousness and logical approach to everything, found human behavior particularly incomprehensible. Their representatives struggled to explain the concept to the assembled delegates. They are not a hive mind, but they can coordinate like one. They are not telepathic, but they can communicate complex ideas without words. They are not specialists, but they can master any skill they encounter. They are not technologically enhanced, but they perform beyond the capabilities of our most advanced systems. The younger aliens like Velanara, the Velkari scientist, began to see the situation from a different angle. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly, she suggested to a gathering of concerned officials. Instead of seeing humans as a threat, we should see them as teachers. They have capabilities that we have lost or never developed. They might be exactly what the galaxy needs to face the challenges that lie ahead. But the older delegates, with their memories of ancient conflicts and their understanding of how quickly peaceful civilizations could be conquered by more adaptable ones, were not convinced. They had seen what happened when advanced but static civilizations encountered primitive but flexible species. The advanced ones usually ended up as historical footnotes. The debate continued in meeting rooms throughout the station while Guan remained completely unaware of the diplomatic crisis he had caused. He had made friends with maintenance workers from dozens of different species, learned to play games he had never seen before, and was genuinely enjoying his time meeting beings from across the galaxy. His casual attitude toward challenges that terrified the galaxy's finest minds was perhaps the most human thing about him. He approached every new experience with curiosity rather than fear, every problem as a puzzle to be solved, rather than an obstacle to be feared, and every being he met as a potential friend, rather than a threat to be eliminated. The final test was announced, but by now everyone understood that this was not really about testing the humans' capabilities anymore. It was about testing whether the galaxy was ready to accept what humanity represented and whether two completely different approaches to existence could coexist peacefully. The answer to that question would determine not just the outcome of the academic exchange, but the future of interstellar civilization itself. And as the delegates prepared for what might be the most important day in galactic history, they realized that their carefully ordered universe was about to change in ways that no one could predict or control. The final challenge was unlike anything the galaxy had ever attempted before. Instead of testing specific skills or individual capabilities, it was designed to simulate the kind of complex crisis that real civilizations faced in the dangerous universe. Beyond the safe borders of known space, the scenario involved a failing space station, multiple species with completely different needs, limited resources, and a time constraint that made careful planning impossible. It was the type of situation that usually required teams of specialists working for months with access to the most advanced technology available, and even then success was not guaranteed. The challenge would test not just intelligence and physical ability, but leadership, adaptability, and the capacity to find solutions that satisfied everyone's needs. While building foundations for future cooperation, the participants would be divided into mixed species teams, each led by one of the exchange representatives. The goal was not simply to prevent disaster, but to create something better than what had existed before, while ensuring that every species felt heard and valued in the process. It was designed to be the ultimate test of what advanced civilizations could accomplish when they worked together. Juwan's team included Velinara the young Velkari scientist whose crystal form sparkled with nervous energy, Theronkala, a member of the collective who had been granted individual autonomy specifically for this exercise, Zephyrin, a Zephyrian energy being who specialized in systems analysis, and Morphthalomorphian, engineer whose 6 arms could work on multiple problems simultaneously. On paper, it was a perfectly balanced team with complementary skills, vast combined knowledge, and access to technologies that could solve almost any problem, but the scenario they faced would challenge everything they thought they knew about cooperation and problem solving. The crisis began with cascade failures throughout the simulated station. Life support systems were shutting down one by one. Artificial gravity was fluctuating wildly, and the various species aboard were beginning to panic as their different environmental needs created impossible conflicts. The Velkari needed specific mineral compositions in their atmosphere. The Theron required constant data connections to function properly. The Zephyrians needed stable energy fields to maintain their forms, and the Morphians required precise pressure balances to survive. The other teams immediately began following standard procedures. They set up communication networks, established command hierarchies, and started systematic analysis of the failing systems. It was logical, efficient, and exactly what their civilizations had trained them to do for millions of years. They approached the problem with advanced technology, careful planning, and the assumption that the right combination of specialists could solve any challenge. Jejun looked at the chaos for about 30 seconds, then did something that confused everyone watching. Instead of analyzing the technical failures, he started walking toward the simulated inhabitants, asking about their immediate needs and concerns. Instead of trying to fix the complex systems, he began focusing on the people who were suffering. Instead of establishing a command structure, He started treating everyone as equally important regardless of their species or status. His approach was completely different from what the galaxy expected. He did not try to solve all the problems at once, but prioritized based on what would prevent the most immediate suffering. He did not rely on advanced technology, but used basic engineering principles and improvised solutions that anyone could understand. He did not create a hierarchy, but built a collaborative network where every species contributed their strengths to help others overcome their weaknesses. The breakthrough came when he realized that the different species' conflicting needs were not actually conflicts at all. They were complementary requirements that could be satisfied simultaneously. With the right approach, the Valkyrie needed specific minerals that could be provided by processing the Morphean waste products, the Theron. Data requirements could be met by using the Zephyrian energy patterns as carriers. The Zephyrian stability needs could be satisfied by the Valkyrie crystalline structures that naturally regulated energy flows. But the most remarkable thing was not his technical solutions, but his ability to get beings who had never worked together to function as a unified team. He treated every alien's concerns as equally valid, found ways to communicate across species barriers that had existed for millions of years, and created an atmosphere where cooperation felt natural rather than forced. He turned each team member into a teacher for the others, showing the Valkyrie how Morphean engineering could enhance their crystal structures, helping the Theron understand how individual initiative could improve collective decisions, and demonstrating to the Zephyrians how solid matter partnerships could stabilize energy processes. The other teams watched in amazement as Juwan's group not only solved the immediate crisis but created a more stable